Hey Rebels, my name is Matthew Barton. I'm the host of the Rebellion Brewing Podcast. Today's guest is Ren Navarro. She's based out of the Ontario craft beer scene. She's worked with the beer industry for years, and she does public speaking and consulting, including at the Craft Brewers Conference in Denver, Colorado, which is how she came onto my radar. One of the things I've noticed about beer marketing trends is a swing between frat boys crushing crispy boys and the pretentious, mustache-twirling hipsters. But the actual audience of beer drinkers is so much bigger, and very few breweries are talking to these people. And that's a problem. But luckily, that's where Ren comes in. On today's episode, I'm going to ask her all about her work as an advocate for diversity in craft beer, her work as the co-founder for the Society of Beer Drinking Ladies, and where she sees the industry moving in the next few years. Ren, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I must admit, I'm going to tell the audience, we already recorded an episode and then we had so many technological difficulties, it completely went splat.
Yeah, it was interesting.
So I would like to commend you for your patience with me and welcome you back to the show.
Thanks, man.
So I asked you this last time and I'm going to ask you again. What is your craft beer background?
So I've been in beer for 7 years and started in retail, working at Great Lakes in Etobicoke, so in Ontario. Did that for a year. During that time, I helped co-found Society of Beer Drinking Ladies, which at the time, and while I was there, I've been gone for 3 years now, was just based out of Toronto. It's now expanded, and it's in more cities, which is pretty awesome. After Great Lakes, I moved into sales and then did sales for several years for different breweries. And during that time, started talking about diversity and kind of like, what's it like to be a Black woman in beer, which wasn't something I was thinking about. And the more I had to think about it, then I eventually segued into creating beer diversity. So, I don't sell beer anymore, but I still talk about beer. So it's been a pretty good few years going through it.
Is it something that drives you because you love the culture of beer as much as you love the product? Is that why you're doing what you do?
I fell into it, so I think it's not one of those like I woke up and decided I was going to make a change because I didn't. I started doing this just because I thought it was going to be a really great part-time job to kind of try and get people to just talk about things we don't talk about. And there's so many things that we say that beer is this great community and it's really welcoming, but it's such a generalization that it's not always so welcoming. And it's also the habit of you build your own beer community so you don't know what you don't know. And I think that was kind of just being able to create safe spaces where people could ask questions where, normally you're not supposed to ask those questions and you're not supposed to think of things that way. But if you can't ask questions, you're never going to grow. So I think that was kind of the way that it's grown into.
The concept of a safe space. What do you mean when you say safe space? Because it can kind of be a loaded term for some people.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's for me, it's about being able to ask questions. It's almost like being that 5-year-old and the 5-year-old who just asks all these honest questions and all the adults around them are like, oh, you can't say that. And it's like, well, why can't I? Because I'm curious. Like, I'm legit curious. Like, there's no malice behind it. And that's what I'm trying to do. Create a space where you can ask a question or, have this really great open dialogue where it's like, these are things that we've been told we're not supposed to talk about. They always say like, when you get together with your family or like you've just met someone new, like don't talk about politics or, like here are the things you can't talk about. And I don't want that. I mean, obviously like hate speech is hate speech, but there are a lot of people out there who are just genuinely curious because they either are in positions of privilege within beer or they're very curious about how do I get into it because I don't think I've ever been welcomed into it.
That's a blind spot for me. I just kind of like, hey, come have a pint with me all the time.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's like not everyone thinks that way. and being able to create these open dialogues and just kind of give a moment where someone can say, hey, I wonder how I can sit down with this, this different quote unquote group of people and enjoy a beer. And it's like, well, you can just enjoy a beer. Like, it's, there's no like special handshake, and there shouldn't be. It should just be, I like beer, you like beer. Like, let's just hang out and enjoy this thing together.
You're blowing my mind here. We've been really fortunate. We have a really strong group of women leaders within our brewery, and it's something I've never really worried about or thought about, because we have the Lady Rebels Beer Club, and they sell out almost every event, and they pair this amazing beer with great food. And I got to go and shoot photos at one of them, and it was like lightning. It was electric. The room was filled with women who were just excited to talk about and drink beer.
Damn.
And I can't understand why anyone else wouldn't want to do that, because it was so much fun, and it's been great for us as a community here. I guess maybe I have a blind spot, but tell me in your own words, why do you think diversity is important for the craft beer scene?
I don't think it's just diversity, right? Because the thing is, it's like, you can have so much diversity, but it needs to go with inclusion. And it's twofold. I mean, you want, as a producer of beer, you want more people to enjoy it. And if more people enjoy it, that means more people are paying for your product, which means that there's a financial benefit. So even if you're like, the whole diversity inclusion chat is a sham, you probably want to make enough money to keep your lights on and employ your staff. And once you say it to someone like that, it's like, oh, okay, like I get this part. And I think it's important, because it's just, I mean, it's important in general. It's not just about the beer community. Take out the word beer, put in any industry you want. This conversation is applicable to like every place around the world. It's just, it happens to be that, this is what you and I are really interested in. And this is our world, and, this is what we're living. So it's one of those things where it's just, this is kind of a no-brainer, but again, everyone does this weird dance around it. And when people think about diversity, they also think about removing certain people from the room, and that's not what it's about. And that's one of those huge problems where it's like, is that why people don't want to talk about diversity? Because then it suddenly means I can't have a group of privileged people who look a specific way leading things. And it's like, no, that's not what it's about.
That's interesting to me. I've seen that a bit, where they kind of, the backlash to super wokeness, where it means now discriminating against people or excluding people who were previously in a position of power, who didn't necessarily treat people fairly. That's a really tough paradox.
Yeah, and I think because we're in this society of like, we've got to pussyfoot around things, and like, what is this wokeness thing? Like, what is that? It just, so you have an awareness. Like, it's not that you're woke. I mean, I hate using the word woke because it makes it sound like it's a new concept. And it's not. I mean, there are so many groups of people within beer trying to have their voices heard. Like, why are there so many women beer groups, right? Like, why did that happen? Because we didn't have a space, so we decided to carve out our own space. And now it's being accepted by the beer community and the beer world at large. So it's not, again, not a new concept. And what I usually say to people is like, picture craft beer as a family table. And there's a bunch of people already sitting there. And you come into the room, and instead of someone saying there's no room for you, or like these people have to leave, they simply say, we're going to squish over and we're going to make space for you. That's what it's about. It's just about making space for more people. It's not about excluding people. It's it's almost like that kindergarten thing. Like, just be a nice person and invite someone in, like, I like Legos, you like Legos. Hey, like, let's chat about it. 'Cause you've got, the Star Wars version of it, and I've got the Star Trek. Like, let's just sit and share our knowledge, because Lego is the thing that unites us, but there's different pieces within it.
So how do we get there? What are some of the barriers or concerns that we need to overcome today? I like your analogy of the Thanksgiving table and sliding in another chair.
Yeah, I mean that's talking about it being the craft beer family table, and just reminding people, like, we're not trying to remove those who are already there, because people get really worried about it. Or, God forbid the trolls, but they're, well, if you don't like it, just open your own brewery. And it's like, well, that doesn't fix the problem, because then I'm just opening a brewery, and then what? I'm going to exclude you? Like, that's not what it's about. So, yeah, I think that it's, at the end of the day, it's about saying, don't be afraid to ask a question. Don't be afraid to stick your neck out. And if it doesn't work, it's okay. You can try it again. Like, take it back, rejig it, put it back out. It's, quite often I'll say to brewers, like, have you dumped beer before? And I was like, well, yeah. I'm like, well, then why are you still a brewer? Because I've seen you do these diversity initiatives and they fail and then you walk away from them. Like, you learned from dumping that batch on how to make a better batch of beer. So why is it that this thing fails and you're like, I'm done? And it's about creating support for each other and, being able to talk to other breweries who've done it and, like, had success. Like, hey, how did that work for you?
That's really cool. I've never really thought about it that way. Maybe it's just because we have so many strong women. I'm at a loss for words.
Yeah.
I guess one of the things that we were seeing in the news recently was the incident with Founders Brewing in Michigan. They're really famous for their breakfast stout. It's delicious, and it was weird because one of the owners was in a deposition in a lawsuit, and he wouldn't admit that one of his staff members was black, and he wouldn't admit that Barack Obama or Michael Jordan was black. It was a really bizarre legal defense.
Mm-hmm.
And what did you take away from that?
People are stupid. I mean, that's that whole, like, ignorance is bliss kind of thing. And it's just like, I find it very dangerous when people say I don't see color, because then that means that you're erasing someone else's being. And he's a rich guy and it's ridiculous. And the first time I saw it, I thought it was an Onion article, because there's no way that anyone in all seriousness would say that. And, here we are. Like, I'm kind of dumbfounded by it. I still, I was actually just talking about it with friends last night. And because we just, every so often we're like, do you remember this? Like, what do you think? And it's just, I don't know what to think. I think that it's one of those things where you have to process it, because you're like, really? Like, that's a thing? So, yeah, I don't know. I think it's really disappointing. And I think it's dangerous. And it's so incredibly exclusionary. Like, that guy worked really hard in beer, and you're going to say, I didn't know he was black because I couldn't tell. Like, really? It doesn't make sense.
I mean, it was kind of bruising for them. They did hire someone, a diversity and inclusion director, and then she very publicly resigned on Twitter in this fairly scathing letter. It seemed to just keep spiraling for them. They couldn't open their mouth to switch feet.
Yeah.
Why can't we just pull up another chair to the table?
And that's, what I mean? That's exactly, like, why aren't we pulling up another chair to that table? And Gracie, who was the diversity director, like, they didn't, when they brought her on board, which was in January, so it hasn't even been a full year. They brought her on board. They simply stated, we have hired a diversity director to, like, help us get our stuff right. They didn't name who it was. They didn't say credentials. They said nothing. I met Gracie in Denver in April at the Craft Brewers Conference, and she's very sheepish about it, because things were still, like, high alert. And I remember getting her card, because we just exchanged cards, and I looked at it and I was like, oh, it's you. And I was just like, good luck. And And it wasn't meant in a malicious, like, oh yeah, good luck. But it was just like, good luck, because nothing had been put out between January and the time I met her. And so obviously it was just lip service. They just brought someone in to warm a chair. And that's proof that just because you say you're doing something to fix the problem doesn't mean that everyone's going to believe you. And it doesn't mean that the problem's actually going to get fixed. Because, like, diversity is not a problem. It's an ongoing issue. It's not a problem that you can just magically make go away. I think that she was never going to succeed, which is such an unfortunate thing to say. But there was no way. There was no way she could have fixed it.
That's tough.
Yeah.
I look back on it now, and I was doing a little bit of extra research, and it seems they've settled it. They settled in November, and then they issued another statement saying they're dedicated to inclusivity and diversity. It doesn't seem to have affected their broader sales. They did have to shut down their tap room temporarily in the community, but they're back up again.
Yeah.
So it's strange. I don't know what lessons have been learned. Maybe everybody else can kind of step back and say, let's not do that.
Yeah, that's, it's kind of what I would hope. I think that the problem is that, like, Founders is kind of one of the biggest that's made a mistake. And I think made a mistake, like, oh, put so much yeast in. Who has made a massive, like, just snafu. And the problem is that we all get really mad about it for a while, and then people kind of forget about it, and then they just go back to their normal lives. So yeah, Founders did, they got their wrist slapped, and people weren't pouring their beer and stuff. But at the end of the day, like, the doors are still open, so they're not doing all that bad. I do know that some bars in Ontario basically said, you know what, we're going to pour the beer that we have. Like, we're not going to dump it. We paid for this Founders beer, but we're going to give all the money to local Black charities.
That's cool.
Yeah, and I thought that was so amazing. So, I'm hoping that, like, whoever's listening to this who owns a bar and is like, oh man, I have those kegs of Founders, like, what do I do with it? Sell it. And then donate that money on behalf of Founders to your local Black or Indigenous group of people to, like, help them out and be like, hey, Founders, they supposedly don't see color, but they're going to help you out. And I just think that that's the way to do it.
I guess I might step in a bear trap here. In Saskatchewan, we have a very diverse population. First Nations people are a part of our community. We make land acknowledgements all the time. And yet when we look around the tap rooms and the bars, we don't see a lot of First Nations people plugged into the craft beer scene. But there's this tension or this friction between encouraging alcohol consumption and then the legacy of colonialism, the legacy of alcoholism and addictions, and it's really tough to unpack. And then it's not just about inclusion, it's about being sensitive to the historical truth of within the community and of our community. I mean, we're all together in this. It's not just they, them. It's tough. It's a tough. I'm searching for the words. How do you thread that needle?
It's super tough. Like, it's, because historically this is what's been built up. It's, that's why there's so many reconciliation programs. Like, this has nothing to do with beer. This has to do with how we've treated a group of people who were here first. And, the stereotypes that have, like, been created over a very long period of time. And but I'm starting to see breweries say, like, hey, we're going to learn from those who live the land and respect it, and we're going to learn some great things. Dominion City recently put out a beer that had cattails and sumac because they were working with an Indigenous group that was close to them. There are breweries that have Indigenous brewers, and they're allowing or learning from them to like add different things to their beer and like understand some different pieces that we as a quote unquote modern society wouldn't look at because we don't see the earth in the same way. We don't see the resources that surround us. So I think that there are breweries trying to make changes. So Dominion City's in Ottawa, Shackland's in Toronto has been doing things. Like it's baby steps, but it's happening.
I was about to ask you who is doing well, who's doing a good job of this, and then you said Dominion City.
Yeah.
I've been following them on Facebook, following them on social media, and they're super interesting, the work they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's a group of people who have been doing it for 5 years and are just about community and creating a welcoming space for people and making space at that family table and saying, we are like the owners are guys who come from some kind of privilege. It's not necessarily money. And are saying we want to learn from those in the community, but we also want to give you a really great product. And weren't
they the guys plugged into activism around Buck-a Beer?
Yes. Yeah, they were the ones who did it. So that was the Doug Ford fiasco. So they created a beer. I think it was either a pale ale or a lager. So again, accessible to everyone. And they called it Buck-a Beer. And what that actually meant was that $1 from every beer was going to an Ottawa Syrian refugee charity.
I remember that detail now. Yeah, that's really interesting that they would take that on. That's cool. That's, like you said, sticking your neck out.
Yeah, and just, and really at the end of the day, like, they're making really solid beer. Like, first and foremost, they're a brewery. But they understand that they can do these extra things. Like, it's not that every brewery has to come out with some crazy beer. Like, again, the beer nerds of the world, we all love it. But make a really solid lager. And like, that's a really accessible beer, but it shows people who are nervous about craft beer that they can have a great, simple tasting beer. And it shows the beer nerds that you can make a solid lager because they're not easy to do and they're time consuming. And, it's just like, it's not fancy, but it's so great. And you can market that to everyone of every background.
That's really cool. A little closer to home, I don't know if you saw this one. There's a brewery in Regina. Their name is Pile O Bones. And Pile O Bones is a name that the city used to be historically. It's
right.
It comes from indigenous roots. They basically said they saw a pile of bones in the region. That's the folklore is they saw a pile of bones. They named the location that, and away we go. So we have like roller derby clubs and tattoo shops and festivals and music things, all connected back to Pile O Bones. And then there was a backlash on Twitter, on social media, saying that they were appropriating indigenous culture and attacking them for basically appropriating First Nations indigenous pieces and then trying to market it. And they were calling them irresponsible and posting pictures of Pile of Bones that were big buffalo carcass piles from the States and from unrelated pieces that weren't from what we would say historically Saskatchewan. And it really knocked them back. Like they were completely dumbfounded by the backlash and the anger towards them. They even have a white IPA. It's one of their most popular beers. And one of the comments was, well, it's a white IPA. Doesn't that just go to show? And they were just like, what? It's a style. It has nothing to do with race.
Yeah.
And it kind of knocked them around for a few days, and then they said, you know what? One of our owners is Métis. We have indigenous family. We're connected to First Nation roots. And the backlash kind of went away after that. But, man, for those couple of days, they were feeling the heat.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, it's always, right? Like, it's always so hard. And I I think we're at that point, like, it's almost unfortunate that they had to say, like, we actually have a connection and, like, here's how our connection is. Because, again, it's, that notion of reconciliation and how do you honor and, without offending, and that, you know, like, great that there's a conversation, but I'm sure, I mean, because it's Twitter and Twitter is a garbage fire at the best of times, that it wasn't, it wasn't a real conversation. Like, it was just someone screaming into the void about how terrible they were for this name. And it just, I mean, at the end of the day, like, do you say, hey, before you name something, run it past X number of people? Because that might be the answer. And if you think it's a great idea and you run it past 20 people and 19 of them are like, yo, maybe you want to rethink it. And I always feel that if you have to go and really explain what you're doing and, like, like, I have to write an essay to you to explain what this means, like, maybe that's not the way to go.
Interesting. I mean, I guess I never really thought about that way because Pile O Bones is just, it's part of our local fabric. Like, we have pancake breakfast and all that stuff, but I don't know if they did that. I think they just said, this is it and this is who we are.
Yeah.
I'll have to bring him on the podcast and ask him.
Yeah, I would love to know more about it.
So this is a beer podcast, and unfortunately we're not sitting face to face.
I know, right?
I was hoping that you could make a couple recommendations for some beers that you've been trying lately, and maybe people can hunt them out when they listen to the podcast.
Yeah, for sure. I just had from Dominion City, actually, their new IPA, and it is actually available online, which is pretty great. I think they only ship within Ontario. Sorry. But they're getting out there, so it's that was one of the last ones I had. I'm trying to think what else I've had recently. It's been like lagers. I've been doing a lot of lagers. So I had a rice lager from Red Circle, which is in Kitchener, because I'm based out of Kitchener, and that was a collaboration between them and Wellington Brewery. So the guys at Red Circle have been around just for a couple of years now. Wellington's been around for over 30 years. And that was a really solid beer. But yeah, if you make it out to Ontario, grab the Dominion City IPA. It's called First Among Equals. And it just came out. So hopefully it'll be around for a bit. So if any of your listeners are traveling out here, come and get it.
If you ever make it out to Regina, if you ever make it out to Saskatchewan, you should probably come and try our hazy double IPA.
Oh, amazing. Yes.
We canned it about 2 weeks ago, and it's just like hitting the perfection of a double IPA. It's juicy and hazy, big mosaic aromatics. It's lights out. I think it might be the best beer we've ever brewed. And
amazing.
I'm not an IPA drinker. I'm a stout guy. I'll love stout. Yeah. I'll talk your ear off about stout all day long. This double IPA is perfection.
Oh yeah, that's amazing. I love that. I got to find someone who's traveling your way.
We do have people do that. They drop in, they pack a bunch of beer in the back of the vehicle, and they said, I'm heading back to Ontario, heading back to Alberta.
Oh yeah, I love it.
So what comes next for Ren Navarro? Where can people find you? Where should they look for you?
So I'll be doing more talks and touring around. So just booking a few things now. I'm going to be in Fort Lauderdale in March at the FML's Brew Fest. I'm really looking forward to that. Also because it's warm out there and I'm tired of being cold already. And then I'll be doing work at different breweries. I'll be popping up kind of around the province at this point, doing talks and workshops. And then hopefully I can make it back out to the Craft Brewers Conference. This year it's going to be in San Antonio, so fingers crossed I can make that work. And then otherwise I'm online. So websites, beer-diversity.com, and then I'm on Instagram and Twitter as beer_diversity.
I might get to go to San Antonio this year, so I'm going to try and find you in the crowd, and maybe we can have a beer together.
Yeah, man, that'd be so amazing.
Thanks for sharing your perspective. I appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Rebels, thanks for listening today. I'm going to include links to Ren's social media channels and her website, so you can find her and follow up if you have any other questions. As you know, this show is never intended to be a one-way conversation. You've given me something precious, your time, and what you have to say is important too. If you'd like to join the conversation and ask our guests more questions or leave a comment about an episode, join us on our brand new Facebook group page. Just search out Rebellion Brewing Podcast. It's located right on Facebook. We'd love to hear from you. I'm also proud to let you know that the Rebellion Brewing Podcast is an affiliate member of the Saskatchewan Podcast Network. If you're into podcasts, you're looking for great content produced right here in Saskatchewan, the Sask Podcast Network at saskpodcastnetwork.com is a great one-stop shop to discover local stories to listen to. As always, if you want to find the latest news about Rebellion Brewing, be sure to check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Untapped. Thank you for joining the Rebellion.